Authors are often asked when and how they get their ideas. I don't know about other writers, but this one usually doesn't have much of a clue. Except when it comes to The Garden of Angels, a tale mostly set in Nazi-occupied Venice in late 1943. The spark for this story happened here in the eastern part of Venice, the edge of the district called Castello. Set around the main street of Via Garibaldi, this is still, for the most part, a local area, full of cafes and shops, busy with people out with their dogs, chatting over a spritz, taking their kids to school. You could be forgiven for thinking nothing much has ever happened in this sleepy quarter of town, a good way distant from the tourist mayhem of the Rialto and Piazza San Marco. But you'd be wrong. In Venice, you always need to look for the details, because they tell a much richer and occasionally darker story than the obvious and well-known features of this astonishing city. In the winter of 2016 and 17, I was mooching around here wondering what next to write, and depressed by the state of the world. The UK had just voted for Brexit. I must admit I called this one wrong. I thought it would be a disaster, not the total f***ing catastrophe it's turned out. And America had elected Donald Trump. Enough said, eh? The world felt odd, detached from reality somehow, detached too from history, the events that shaped us. If you don't know your past, how on earth can you chart a path to the future? And so began 3 years of research and writing that would result in The Garden of Angels. Partway through, I read a quote from Angela Merkel. She said, "When the generation that survived the war is no longer with us, then we'll find out whether we've learned from history." That, I realized, was what I was writing about. Yesterday and today conjoined, both the Venice under Nazi occupation and the personal struggles of a young Venetian in the late 1990s, comfortable, wealthy, a touch arrogant, as he comes to realize he knows nothing about recent history, and little too about his own family. In late 1943, the north of the country was under the bloody iron fist of Hitler, with Mussolini installed as a puppet dictator in the short-lived Italian Social Republic. Nazi soldiers and Italian fascists ruled the roost, stealing, bullying, murdering anyone they liked, Jews and political opponents most of all. Venice escaped military action from the Allies because they decided it was too precious to attack directly. In a way, the city in the lagoon was a sanctuary from the conflict. La Fenice still put on operas. Nazi officers brought their mistresses here for illicit weekends. The bars, the casinos were busy, along with theatres and the brothels. But the war was not absent. The resistance were in the city, covertly printing newspapers that could put them in front of a firing squad. And fighters were among them too, men and women who would sometimes kill Nazi soldiers on the street, sparking the predictable grim retaliation. When partisans bombed one of the headquarters of the fascists and killed 13 people, the Nazis dragged 13 Italian prisoners from jail and shot them on the rubble of the building. Visitors now dine in the fine cafe close to where this happened, by the rebuilt building. It's called Ca' Justinian and sits on the Grand Canal next to the Valaresso Vaporetto stop, along from San Marco, and today it serves as the headquarters of the Biennale. Few of those sipping a spritz on the terrace could imagine its bloody past. The narrow lane next to Ca' Justinian is called the Alley of the 13 Martyrs. Back in quiet Castello, you'll also find the Riva del Partigiani, the shore of the partisans, and a little way away the Riva dei Sette Martiri, the shore of the 7 martyrs, with a wreath close by and a plaque with 7 names. Who were they, I wondered back then? What happened here during World War II? The 7 martyrs were Venetians shot near the plaque that marks their deaths after a Nazi soldier was found drowned in the lagoon. Murdered by partisans, the fascists claimed, though he may well have simply fallen in drunk. No matter, retribution was called for, as was the rounding up of Jews for the concentration camps. And so begins the canvas for my story, as it's uncovered by 15-year-old Nico Ocello. heir to a rich weaving family, told to him piece by piece by his grandfather Paolo, slowly fading in the great hospital of Giovanni Paolo. It begins, the wartime part, with the discovery of a woman's body at the very edge of Venice, San Pietro. Let me hand over to Richard Armitage, narrator of the audiobook for W.F. Howes, to take you through the scene.
She came out of the leaden winter water just after 8 in the morning, bare, bruised arms, battered face white and waxy, stocky frame wreathed in seaweed, twisted like a dying saint in one of the many martyrdoms that adorned the church walls. Above the fading morning mist, gulls squawked hungrily, sensing food. Paolo Uccello didn't look too closely, but it appeared the fish had been there already. A hard winter sun was struggling to burn through the fog. Its efforts set the faintest shadow of the Campanile Tower of San Pietro across the scene on the mud and pebbles. He was coming to hate the cries of the seabirds. They followed him everywhere.
One theme I wanted to explore in this book is, where does courage come from? What makes ordinary people, who doubtless would never think of themselves heroic at all, risk their lives to oppose barbaric tyranny of the kind the fascists were imposing on Venice? Paolo Uccello is only a few years older than his grandson at this point, meek, quiet, scared, but not cowardly. He sees something, feels something that will alter his life for good, a sense of outrage that will put lives at risk as he seeks to hide 2 fugitive Jewish partisans from the Nazis who are hunting them. All this takes place in a mix of real and semi-real locations, mostly on San Pietro, a small island northeast of the Via Garibaldi, connected to the rest of Castello by just 2 bridges. The Basilica of San Pietro here, with its separated campanile, was once the most important in Venice, before that role was transferred to the fancier place in the Piazza San Marco. But even today, San Pietro is a place that seems barely awake. No cafes, no shops beyond those 2 bridges, just a vaporetto stop, lots of modest local housing, and a basilica on its green by the stretch of water, where Paolo saw the body of a woman he half knew, dragged from the water by a bunch of Nazi soldiers who seemed to find the whole thing funny. Newly orphaned, Paolo has inherited the remains of his parents' struggling weaving company, an extraordinary skill I was able to witness in a small palazzo by the Grand Canal in Santa Croce, run by the Bevilacqua Company. Here you'll find the jacquard looms that have produced traditional Venetian velvet for centuries, noisy, complex, clattering machines that use a process I still don't understand to turn out exquisite handmade velvet that's sold around the world. Paolo's workshop is much more modest, and he has little in the way of commissions to pay the bills. In the book, his home sits in the ruins of a palazzo across the water from San Pietro by the Arsenale. I call it the Garden of Angels, but in truth it doesn't exist. If it did, it would be in the Giardini delle Vergini, many centuries ago a nunnery, now a charming large garden come park. Here Paolo's story and his relationship with the runaway Jewish partisans, Fanny and Mika Artom, would play out. It's a lovely, secluded spot with wide views of the Arsenale and back over the wall to that Campanile of San Pietro, which plays an important role in the story. Sometimes during the Biennale, there's a ferry back to the busier side of the Arsenale too, but watch out for the bugs in summertime. The trees in the garden are full of them, and they're waiting to swoop hungrily on visitors. Paolo's family once had money and lived in smarter Dorsoduro, but now they're on their uppers, and before they died in an Allied bombing raid in Verona, his parents were mostly snubbed by their neighbours in the narrow, modest streets in this part of Castello. It's an area that's traditionally left-wing, where partisan sentiments ran strong among many, as the Nazis knew. No one with money lived in the alleys off Via Garibaldi, and even today there are signs that politics is never far from the thoughts of some, or the fate of those 7 martyrs who are honoured with a ceremony each year. Memories still matter, for some in Italy at least. Which takes me across town to the other important location in the book, the Ghetto. For centuries, if not millennia, many European authorities doubtless demanded families of particular races, Jews especially, be confined to a set part of their city. It was Venice that gave the practice the name Ghetto. This was originally a small island used for an iron foundry, a ghetto in Venetian. The term stuck when the Venetian authorities decided to use it for another purpose, to house the city's Jewish population, hemmed in with regulations and restrictions that never applied to the locals. In 1998, I set about writing my first Venetian novel, Lucifer's Shadow, recently republished, which is in part about a young female Jewish musician looking to throw off the constraints of both sex and race. The buildings are little changed. The synagogues you can visit hidden almost entirely from view. The old folks' home, which the Nazis emptied as they looked to fill the wagons for the concentration camps. It's different today, though. There are armed police in the area, security guards, and the museum, when it was open, made everyone go through an airport-style scanner before they entered. You will also see a recent innovation in the worn cobbles, shiny stolpersteiner, stumbling stones that mark the homes of those who were deported during the Shoah and never returned. The Ghetto is a place that's certainly worth visiting, but not somewhere I return to regularly. There's still for me an atmosphere there I find disconcerting, though perhaps that's due to the vast amount of literature and testimony I read when writing this book. Young Nico is puzzled why his dying grandfather is offering this alarming insight into the past. Only at the end of the story, close to the present day, does the truth finally occur to him. The Garden of Angels is a story of sacrifice, of great courage, of determination, and also the way war changes people, ordinary people, makes them do things they would never have countenanced in peacetime. Good things sometimes, but not always. 7 years on from starting the story, 4 after finishing it, I still think of Angela Merkel's words and how they proved central to the work of fiction I came to produce. When the generation that survived the war is no longer with us, then we'll find out whether we learn from history. I'm afraid I'm convinced now she's wrong. We know already.